conflict between Jews and Arabs goes back to before the formal founding of the current state of Israel. Since the final rebellion of the Jews, under Simon bar Kokhba in the 150s AD, the Jews had been mostly expelled from the land of Israel and the area became known as Syria-Palestine. Only a small community of Jews remained in the area after this period. The rest of the Jews were dispersed in all directions, and would remain so for almost 2,000 years. During which time they were continually harassed and persecuted, and often killed. Yet as the centuries passed, this unique group of people never lost its distinctive identity, nor did they forget the promised land from which they had come. Their religious and cultural traditions kept the dream of the land and the sacred city of Jerusalem alive in their different locations across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and North America. This mindset was exemplified in a well-known phrase, "Next year in Jerusalem," which expressed the sense of longing and sadness that was in the heart of every Jewish person. The birth of the modern state of Israel did not begin with the formal declaration of independence in 1948. Rather, it was a complex process that started almost 50 years earlier with a movement called Zionism. Zionism emerged primarily from Jews living in Central and Eastern Europe and came in response to particularly brutal pogroms against Jews during that period. The founder and most important figure in this movement was a man named Theodor Herzl. The primary goal of Zionism was to secure a homeland through legal means for the Jewish people where they could live in safety from persecution. The hope was to return to the land of their ancestors, but the leaders of the movement did consider other areas in Africa and South America. This group of Jews established the Jewish Fund, in which they collected money to legally purchase land in the Ottoman province of Palestine for the settling of Jewish immigrants from Europe. Despite the exile of most of the Jews from Palestine in the 150s, it would not be true to say that no Jews remained. There was a small Jewish community that survived and remained in the land living quietly amongst the other inhabitants of Palestine. In the 7th century, the Arabs arrived during the Muslim conquest of the area, and many Arabs as well as other tribes moved into the area. The region then became a province of the many Islamic caliphates that emerged over the centuries, not all of which were under Arab control. Except for the 12th century, when the area was controlled by the Crusader states, this state of affairs held steady until the beginning of the 20th century, when the area was a small backwater province of the decaying Ottoman Empire. During this time there were roughly 30,000 Jews living mostly around Jerusalem, as well as several 100,000 Arabs. During this time Arab national identity had not yet developed, though its earliest stirrings could at this time be felt. The Jewish community during this time came to be referred to as the Old Yeshiv, which was a way to refer to the pre-state community of Jews in Palestine. Due to the influence and assistance of Zionism, however, Jews began to immigrate to the area. As they came they changed both the nature and the character of the Jewish community in the area. These Jewish immigrants came to the land of Palestine in successive waves known as Aliyahs, or those who went up. As these new Jews came, the community came to be referred to as the New Yeshiv. The first Aliyah occurred in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Mostly Russian in origin, these Jews were fleeing particularly vicious pogroms and were seeking a place where they could live in peace. During this period roughly 20 to 30,000 Jews settled in Palestine. Over time, the arrival of these new Jews created tension not only with the local Arabs but also the Ottomans. Eventually, land sales to Jews were banned. However, Jewish leaders found ways around this ban due to corrupt local Ottoman officials who could be bribed to look the other way. The second Aliyah from 1904 to 1914 saw an additional 40,000 arrive, mostly from Europe. The third Aliyah lasted from 1919 to 1923, saw another 35,000 Jews arrive. The fourth Aliyah, 1924 to 1929, were mostly from Poland, which prior to World War II had the largest Jewish community in the world. The fifth and final Aliyah, 1932 to 1936, brought between 234,000 and 384,078 more new Jews. The actual number is hard to determine, because of the necessity of illegal immigration due to British policy to appease Arab sentiment. The vast majority of Jews arriving in the fifth Aliyah were wealthy and educated Jews from Germany and Central Europe. By 1936, Jews constituted 1/3 of the total population in Palestine. The moment that large numbers of Jews began arriving in the area, it resulted in tension and resentment from local Arabs. However, the naivety of this view was soon made clear. There was much debate about the proper approach to take. Many of the leaders within Zionism hoped for peaceful coexistence. Leaders, such as Herzl, envisioned Jews and Arabs peacefully living and working side by side, as the educated and hardworking Jews helped to bring mutual prosperity to an impoverished region. Others, however, thought that force would be necessary to secure the safety of any future Jewish state. In 1937, the British government convened the Peel Commission to determine a long-term plan for Palestine. This was the first formal proposal of a two-state partition of the land between Jews and Arabs. It called for population transfers of both sides. Many of the Jewish leaders opposed this solution on the ground that it only gave them about 20% of Palestine. However, David Ben-Gurion and others convinced the leaders that they would be fools to reject this, and the next Zionist Congress accepted the proposal. The Arabs rejected the plan, which gave them 80% of the land outright, and engaged in another round of violence. In 1938, the British government published the White Paper. Within the White Paper, the British government made major concessions to the Arabs. Jewish immigration was limited to 25,000 Jews over a 5-year period. Limits were placed on property purchases by Jews, and an Arab-majority state covering all of Palestine was promised within 10 years. Amazingly, the Arabs rejected even this offer. For their part, the Jews saw this as reneging on the commitments made by the British in the Balfour Declaration. Some extreme Jewish groups, perhaps learning from the Arabs, began to attack the British as a form of strategy to achieve their aims. The rest of the Yishuv began supporting illegal immigration. Following World War II, the British had had enough trying to govern the mandate. They turned over responsibility of the area to the newly formed United Nations. On November 29, 1947, the General Assembly of the UN adopted Resolution 181-2, which recommended the adoption of a plan to divide the land of Palestine into an Arab state, a Jewish state, and an internationally administered city of Jerusalem. Zionists accepted the plan, but the Arabs opposed it. The following date Palestine was immersed in conflict. Palestinian Arabs and other Arab volunteer militias began attacking Jewish communities. In response, the defense of Jewish communities was managed by several militias including the Haganah, Irgun, and Lehi. These militias were strengthened by many Jewish veterans of World War II and foreign volunteers. As time went on, the Yishuv began to be able to go on the offensive, and the Jews began to gain more and more territory. By the spring of 1948, the Arab forces were close to total collapse. Many Palestinian Arabs fled from their homes, creating a large-scale refugee crisis. On May 14, 1948, the Jewish leaders formally announced their declaration of the establishment of the State of Israel. Immediately in response, the Arab League decided to intervene on behalf of the Palestinian Arabs. Forces from Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq marched into Palestine all at once. The fighting was fierce, and by the conclusion of the conflict in 1949, over 15,000 people had died on all sides. A ceasefire and armistice was signed in 1949. Israel held most of the former Mandate territory. Jordan occupied the West Bank and Egypt took over the Gaza Strip. The Arab League formed the All-Palestine government, which claimed sovereignty over all the land of Palestine. But they actually only had control over the Gaza Strip, as Jordan was the sole Arab state which did not recognize the government. While the new state of Israel has survived its first challenge, its leaders knew that the next conflict was only a matter of time. Throughout the early 1950s, Jordan and Egypt supported Palestinian militants' cross-border attacks into Israel, usually targeting civilian villages. To deter such attacks, Israel would carry out its own reprisal operations into the host countries. During this period, things came to a head in the 1956 Suez Crisis, also known as the Second Arab-Israeli War, or the Sinai War. So, who do you think is entitled to the land of Israel, the Palestinian Arabs or the Israelis?